Anxiety is a very, very common condition, one of the most common mental health conditions there is, but it's actually not super easy to treat. Our top of the line therapeutic techniques, our best psychiatric medications, have about a 50% success rate on average of actually significantly reducing symptoms in people who seek treatment. Now, there are a lot of reasons for this, but I think one of the biggest ones is because anxiety isn't really one thing. We say the word anxiety, and like everyone knows what anxiety feels like, but when we talk about someone having anxiety, we aren't necessarily talking about all people having the same types of experiences. There are many, many different reasons that we can become anxious. And some of those reasons are not pathological, meaning they aren't your brain overreacting to a relatively minor or benign situation. Sometimes anxiety and the amount of anxiety we feel is actually perfectly appropriate to something that is happening in our life. It's not our brains exaggerating or blowing things out of proportion or underestimating our coping ability. It's our brain looking at something in our life and saying, this is actually a very significant problem and it's going to be an issue. Those types of anxieties don't necessarily respond well to therapy or medication because they aren't caused by faulty thinking or chemical imbalances. They're caused by an actual thing that is happening in your life that needs to be addressed. Now, those things can be addressed in therapy, but it's going to require you to bring them to the attention of your therapist and really work through them. It isn't necessarily going to jump out to a therapist as something they need to talk about. And medication will rarely help with these types of anxiety because they don't have anything to do with serotonin issues or dopamine issues or chemical imbalances, because you're having a reasonable, healthy, and probably unavoidable reaction to a problematic circumstance. Hopefully this video will help raise your awareness of some of these types of anxiety so that you can work through them in one way or another, whether that's through therapy or otherwise. The first type of anxiety that does not respond well to therapy or medication is what I call deception anxiety. This is the fear and stress that comes from keeping one or more secrets from one or more people you love and respect. There are very, very few things in life that are as stressful as that. If you are having to keep an ever-increasing list of stories that you have told people inside of your mind and having to make sure that you keep those stories straight with however many different people, you're going to be an anxious wreck. If there is something in your life, whether it's something on your phone, something in your house somewhere, something in your bank account, that if someone looked at the wrong thing at the wrong time, they would discover a secret that you are so ashamed of that you feel it might break you, how are you ever going to feel calm or relaxed or peaceful if you know that your life and your relationships are constantly one misstep away from completely falling apart? Of course you're going to be an anxious mess living under those circumstances because you are literally, no, metaphorically, walking a tightrope every single day, and you could fall at any time with one wrong move. And it tends to get more and more complicated over time. Now, I don't know your circumstances. I don't know if we're talking about, a substance problem that people don't know about, a gambling or shopping issue, an infidelity issue, a pornography issue. There can be so many different versions of this. So I'm not going to act like I should tell you exactly what to do here. But I can tell you this. This doesn't go away or automatically resolve. And no amount of insight or challenging cognitive distortions or SSRIs is really going to make you calm and relaxed and okay with the fact that you're living a lie. And I'm not trying to make this a call out. I'm just saying that's a really, really hard way to live. And there's really only one way it ever gets any better. And that's if you stop doing the thing that's causing the stress and probably also let somebody know about it. Now, whether the first person you talk to about it is the person it's affecting, or your therapist, or some other support person, again, those details I'm not able to speak into your life because I most likely don't know who you are and what you're going through. But this is a lot to carry by yourself, and it's just going to get worse if you don't address it somehow. It's basically like being undercover 24/7, except the person you are spying on is also someone you love and respect. I don't think there's much that feels worse than that, to be honest with you. It's miserable, and you should do everything in your power to end the cycle of deception anxiety if you're in it. Nothing is going to really make that much of a difference when you're living a lie. The second type of anxiety that does not inherently get better with therapy or medication is digital addiction anxiety. If you have some form of digital entertainment or digital stimulation, whether that's watching sporting events or TV shows, scrolling social media, playing games, that aren't a want for you. They are a need. They are things that are built into the very fabric of your day, things that you have decided you are not okay without, and things that you are not willing to not go without. Your life is inherently going to be incredibly stressful because you have introduced an additional need into your ecosystem and your lifestyle that doesn't need to be there. And just meeting the needs that we inherently have and can't get away from is already incredibly stressful for human beings. I see a lot of content saying, basically paraphrase, but something along the lines of like, how are we supposed to get enough sleep, make food, go to the gym, maintain relationships, take care of our homes, take care of our bodies when we have to work 40 plus hours a week? And don't get me wrong, I am no apologist for capitalism, not even a little bit. And I recognize that life in and of itself is an inherently demanding proposition. But what the posts and the content and the people who say stuff like this are typically leaving out is part of the reason they're having a hard time getting all these things every day is because they spend several hours every single day just staring at a screen in some way or another. We all deserve hobbies and downtime and relaxation, of course. Don't get me wrong. But it's hard enough to get all your needs met in a 24-hour day when you're only trying to meet your actual, real needs. And these digital addictions, like any addiction, they tend to grow over time. You need more and more stimuli to get the same feeling that you're craving from, that first hit. And so it just tends to expand and take up more and more space in our lives and leaves less and less space for everything else, for all the things we actually genuinely need to do. I'm not saying that screens are inherently bad or that social media is inherently bad. I mean, that would obviously make me a raging hypocrite because you are currently watching me on some form of social media, on some type of screen. It's not like you shouldn't do these things at all. But you need to keep them in the right lane of your life. These things are entertainment. They are leisure. They are helpful in the right context and with the right limitations, but they are ultimately optional parts of life. And when you start treating them like a need and get really worried or really stressed out about how you're going to get that time in with all this other stuff that you have to do, they are no longer serving their intended purpose. If a hobby or a downtime activity becomes a stressor and becomes a challenge because you have to figure out how to fit it into your life, and you end up in branching decision paths where you have to make a choice like, should I get enough sleep tonight or play my video game? Then they have gone out of their lane and they are not serving their intended purpose, and they have morphed into needs when they are not needs, they are wants. If the things you want to do feel dramatically more rewarding than the things you have to do, then everything else in your life ultimately feels like a barrier that you have to overcome to get to the thing you really want to do at the end of the day. And all that does is it just artificially increases the difficulty setting of your life. I don't think we need to do that. I think it's hard enough if you just take it as it is. Since we have to spend the majority of our lives taking care of the necessities and just doing the things we don't really have a choice about, trying to juggle a digital addiction with the other demands of your life will ultimately make you more miserable. So if your brain loves something so much that nothing in your life can really compare to it, that thing might need to go. It's like sitting down for every meal and making space for dessert after every meal. Like, I'm not going to eat my steak because I want to eat the ice cream. I know that's a little cheesy, but that's kind of what it ends up being like. Screens and hobbies and leisure time, they're the dessert of life. They are. And when you don't keep them in their place, they can completely blow up your life. And very few things are more stressful than feeling like you don't have enough time every single day to do what you need to do. The third type of anxiety that is not necessarily going to be helped by therapy or medication is caffeine-induced anxiety. This one's going to bother some people. The other ones probably are too. I don't know if this is going to be a very popular video because I am just saying a lot of things that are probably a part of your life. But I think you need to know this stuff. And I have a bold statement for you here. I think we're going to look back on our relationship with caffeine in the past 25 years or so, the early 2000s, the same way we look at our relationship with cigarettes in like the 1950s. We culturally and socially treat caffeine as a substance that is somewhere between harmless and actually good for us. And it is culturally normal to indulge in an excess amount of caffeine. Excess caffeine use does a whole bunch of stuff for you that is actually not super awesome. It increases stress hormones, which worsens anxiety, upsets neurotransmitter balance, and increases sympathetic nervous system activation, which is your fight or flight response. In other words, if you already have anxiety, caffeine's probably going to make you more anxious. And if you have already chronic nervous system activation from PTSD, for example, caffeine is going to make that worse too. It basically just makes your brain and your body do more of whatever they're already doing. But if what they're already doing is stressful and is hard for you, you don't necessarily want to supercharge that. And if you're struggling with chronic anxiety, excess caffeine use is basically just gasoline on a fire. What is excess caffeine use? Obviously, opinions are going to vary a little bit on that. The FDA defines it as over 400 milligrams a day. An average cup of coffee is about 150 milligrams. Energy drinks these days are like 200 to 300. So if you're having like 2 energy drinks a day, that's excess. If you're having 3 cups of coffee a day, like normal size 12-ounce cups of coffee, that's excess. Now, I get it. Life is demanding. You need focus. You need energy. You have goals. So do I. I am very much a recovering caffeine addict. Pre-workouts in particular, I've never been as much of a coffee drinker. Pre-workouts are the things that got me. I find them delicious. I was very reliant upon them for a long time. I have gotten off them recently, and I've been using a different supplement to give me the focus and concentration that I need, and that is something called Magic Mind. So Magic Mind is a mental performance shot made from green tea, herbs, and mushrooms. It does have caffeine. It has about 55 milligrams of organic caffeine. That's obviously going to keep you well below that 400 milligram threshold, even if you are still having a cup of coffee or 2 a day. And it's going to give you similar focus, concentration, and energy as a caffeinated beverage, but it won't spike your anxiety the way drinks loaded with caffeine do. If you aren't ready to reduce your caffeine intake, which I suspect many of you are not, Magic Mind can still be a good supplement to your caffeine. This isn't like an either-or proposition. This could be something you use to maybe replace 1 cup of coffee a day. Or maybe you don't decrease your caffeine intake at all and you just want more things giving you energy and focus. That's okay. It also tastes fantastic. It kind of reminds me of like the dew on the leaves of a crisp spring morning. Not that I drink the dew from leaves. That would be weird. But this is what I imagine it would taste like. In reality, this is probably actually much tastier than leaf water, and that's probably a relatively unflattering comparison. But it's got this nice, just crisp, organic vibe to it. Because it has lower caffeine content, it's also something you could consume later in the day and be less likely to struggle with insomnia. Because as we know, caffeine within 8 to 10 hours of bed is almost always going to create some type of insomnia, whether that's interrupted sleep, difficulty with sleep initiation, or just poor sleep quality. If you have a problematic relationship with caffeine, your anxiety is going to be a little out of control. No matter how much you talk about your childhood and explore your thoughts and take your SSRIs, if you're consuming 6, 7, 800 milligrams of caffeine a day, you're basically trying to work against your own biology. You're going to lose that battle every time. So think about monitoring and maybe putting a hard cap on your caffeine intake if you struggle with anxiety. The 4th type of anxiety that's not going to get better with therapy and medication is what I call self-abuse anxiety. Now, therapy absolutely can work on this if your therapist knows that you struggle with it and if you talk to them about it. But if you don't tell them, they aren't going to have any idea that this is something you need help with. What I mean by self-abuse anxiety, maybe that's obvious, but I'm talking about the relationship you have with yourself in your own mind, the way you talk to yourself throughout the day, the way you try to motivate yourself to accomplish your goals, the way you treat yourself when you have strong feelings like sadness or anger or fear. And most of us, if we're being real, have an abusive relationship with ourselves. Most of us, if some other person talked to us the way we talk to us, we'd get the heck out of that relationship. We'd say, this person is toxic, this person is terrible. We would get as far away from them as we could. And it's even worse. It's not okay just because it comes from you. It's worse because you will never feel safe and comfortable in this world if the greatest antagonist in your story has taken up residence inside of your own mind. You can never escape from yourself, not even when you sleep. So if you don't know how to talk back to that nagging, critical, horrible voice that narrates every second of your existence, then every day of your life is going to be a grueling battle of attrition. You need to know how to talk back to this voice. You have to be able to tell it when it's wrong, when it's being stupid, when it's blowing things out of proportion, or when it's being ridiculous, which frankly is probably going to be often. It's going to oversimplify things. It's going to cut corners. It's going to act like it has no idea what you've been through or what your backstory is. And it's going to be like, why did you do that? Why did you think that person was going to leave you? As if that hasn't happened 5 times to you before. Why were you worried about losing this job when you've been fired before? Like, it's going to pretend like you have no history and no backstory, and it's going to judge you in complete ignorance of who you are and what you've been through, because that's what it does. And you have to be able to give yourself that context, that empathy, that validation, so that you aren't fighting with your own mind every single day. Now, it's hard to do this. And I think one of the reasons it's hard to do this is because that voice just sounds like you. Even if the thoughts or the ideas it's saying to you were put there by somebody else, at some point you claim them and you own them and you just start repeating them as yourself. And there's this thing we do where it's like, even if we don't like ourselves and respect ourselves, when we hear us talking to us, there's a part of our brains that's like, well, that must be true because it's me saying it and I know me. I know everything about me. So if I know everything about me and I say I'm a loser, obviously I'm a loser, right? A quick hack that I have used to fight back against it is to give that voice the name and the vocal tone and the mannerisms of somebody I can't stand. Somebody who I would want to argue with anything that they said to me, even if they actually said something completely reasonable. So whether that person is someone you know personally, like someone in your life who you kind of can't stand, it could be a famous person, a politician perhaps, common choice. It could be a fictional character, from a movie, a book, whatever. If you attribute the unhelpful thoughts in your mind to your actual worst enemy or most hated person or being, you might find that you start to have a different relationship with those thoughts. And that rather than just accepting them and aligning with them and having whatever feelings they want you to feel, you actually start fighting back a little bit. And you actually start to take back space in your own mind from that inner critic. So if you ever hear me saying, "Shut up, Steve," with absolutely no context whatsoever, now you know why. The fifth type of anxiety that doesn't necessarily get better with therapy and medication is discomfort anxiety. This is that fear or that general desire to avoid any situation or place or relationship that makes you feel uncomfortable. Now again, I get it. When we live with chronic anxiety, we already feel uncomfortable all the time. Like, that's our normal state of being, is discomfort. And so the idea of taking your baseline already high level of discomfort and then voluntarily adding on to it seems like a terrible proposition. I understand. And when just existing is stressful, it seems like it makes sense to not add anything to that, to not add optional stressors when the mandatory stressors are already more than you can bear on a given day. But the thing is, if you live in constant fear of finding yourself in situations that produce feelings of discomfort, it's actually going to make your life harder because you're going to have a very stressful, understimulating, and oddly prison-like existence. Most of this world is going to feel inaccessible to you if you have discomfort anxiety because your comfort zone, the things, people, places that you feel good about, that you can just do whenever, is very small. It's a teeny tiny corner of the world that you have voluntarily confined yourself to, and you have said, I'm not going to leave because it's too scary out there and I don't know what's going on. And it is scary out there. Again, you're not wrong. But the only way that ever changes, the only way it ever gets less scary is if, in some sort of stepwise, logical manner, you start to explore it a little bit. You start to challenge it a little bit. I used to have so much anxiety about just being incompetent at things. Especially when I was a teenager, I didn't have a lot of skills. I know no teenager has a ton of skills, but I had 0 because I didn't do anything. And since I didn't do anything, I wasn't good at anything. And so I really only liked hanging out with my friends if we were just playing video games or like doing nothing. And sometimes they'd say like, let's go ride bikes, or like, let's work on this car, or like, let's do this yard work. Not often because we were teenage boys, but like every now and then they wanted to actually do stuff. I lived in constant fear of anyone suggesting we do stuff because I was not good at stuff. I wasn't good at anything. And I didn't want to get exposed. I didn't want to look like an idiot and be like, oh, like have a friend be working on his car or whatever and be like, hand me that wrench. And I hand him some not wrench tool. And he's like, well, you're an idiot. Which he probably, well, we were teenage boys, so he would have said it, but he wouldn't have meant it in the way I would have heard it. You know what I mean. The point is, living in constant fear of being discovered like that, or just being in situations where you're like, I don't know what to do, it's miserable. And sometimes that's actually why you feel this constant sense of anxiety, because you know that you don't really have the tools to deal with life, and there aren't really very many places you're comfortable. And there's only one way it's ever going to change, is if you start doing those things. You cannot, again, this is not pathological anxiety. It isn't the sign of an anxiety disorder to be nervous about doing something you're bad at. Our brains are designed to do that. When they know we're not good at something, they're like, no, you shouldn't. That's scary. You have to do those things to overcome them. There's no other way out of that little corner you're trapped in, because you cannot grow your comfort zone while you are in it. This is really important, so I'm going to say it again. You cannot grow your comfort zone while you are in your comfort zone. You cannot just sit in your safe place and think about things you might want to do someday and get more comfortable with them. You have to do them. That's the only way. So if the majority of the world feels scary to you right now and you don't want to interact with it because of that fear, you're going to have to do some new things from time to time. And that's the only way this feeling ever changes. The sixth type of anxiety that isn't necessarily going to get better with therapy or medication is exhaustion anxiety. Prefrontal cortex activity, prefrontal cortex is a part of your brain, I'll explain this in just a second here, decreases by 10% approximately for each lost hour of sleep the night before. And most people need about an average of 8 hours of sleep. So if you got 6 hours of sleep last night, your prefrontal cortex, assuming everything else is good, is functioning at about 80% today. Why does that matter? Because the prefrontal cortex is responsible for, among other things, emotion regulation, which is your ability to have a feeling and figure out how to deal with it, distress tolerance, which is your ability to have a difficult feeling like anxiety and not have it overwhelm you and have a panic attack, long-term planning, thinking about how a decision you might make today will affect you in an hour or a week or a month. Critical thinking, which is kind of dissecting ideas, hearing or thinking of ideas and trying to figure out, well, does that actually make sense? Is that a reasonable idea, or is that a ridiculous idea? Behavioral inhibition, which is your ability to feel an urge or an impulse to do something and actually think it through and decide whether you should do it or not, rather than just like instantly acting upon it. And complex social engagement, which is your ability to correctly interpret things like tone of voice and body language and perspective taking and empathy, and basically figuring out like how people actually think and feel around you. If you often find yourself thinking something like, I need an adult, and you're an adult, your prefrontal cortex is your adult. And if your adult is exhausted and needs a nap, guess who's left in charge of your life? It's your toddler, your limbic system, which basically is a toddler because it doesn't really change or develop very much from when you're very, very young. And what this looks like is you make bad choices that are hard to come back from. You get annoyed, scared, or sad from just teeny little things, or sometimes literally nothing. You take everything personally, even when it wasn't meant that way. You think everybody's mad at you all the time. These are all effects of an exhausted, dysfunctional prefrontal cortex. If that part of your brain is not working well enough to do its job, talking about it isn't going to help. SSRIs aren't going to help. Your brain is missing a resource it needs, and there's nothing that can replace that resource except sleep. So you know what the solution is to this, right? Get more sleep. And I know that that is easier said than done, especially if you are in fact living with chronic anxiety, because one of the symptoms of chronic anxiety is problems with sleep. So I get that this is sort of a chicken or the egg thing here. If you're struggling with sleep, I have made tons of videos on this topic. So please feel free to check those out and get some more strategies for how to improve your sleep. It will make a tremendous difference in your mood. And you know what else would also help with sleep? Drinking less caffeine and getting off your phone. So this kind of ties in with some of the other ones too. The seventh type of anxiety that isn't probably going to get better with therapy or medication, and the last one I'm going to talk to you about today, is death anxiety. You are going to die someday. So is everybody you love. Some of the people you love will die before you, and you will have to mourn them. Some of the people you love will die after you, and they will have to mourn you. This sucks. It just does. We live in a messed up, broken, fallen world, and those are simply part of the terms of our existence, and I hate them, and I find them terrible. I remember being like 6 or 7 years old and realizing my parents could die, would die, and most likely would die before me, and going into one of the worst depressive episodes of my life because I couldn't accept those terms, because that just seemed wrong to me. I couldn't believe that those were actually the parameters of this existence. It just seemed so messed up and so unfair. There are obviously no real earthly answers to this one. Life is what it is, and someday it will end. And again, it's not pathological to have feelings about that. Like, that sucks. That's a miserable proposition. I am not your spiritual advisor. My skill set in that is not particularly high just yet. But I will say this much. Working out your beliefs about what this life is for and what you think happens after you die is probably the only way you're really going to have success navigating and coping with your death anxiety. Unless you're just one of those people who's just really cool with this, in which case you probably aren't watching this video because you probably have an unusually low level of anxiety. Because frankly, I don't know how people do that without some sort of belief system that makes this make sense to you. Because if there's nothing making that like an acceptable, understandable thing, then the whole thing just is miserable. So that's all I've got for you today. If you're feeling a little overwhelmed, because I threw a lot of stuff out there today, I know. And if you're like, a lot of times when I make these list videos, I see people comment where they're saying like, I have 5 out of 7 or whatever. So if a lot of what I just said applied to you, you may be feeling a bit overwhelmed right now. One last thing I'd like to remind you of, in most cases, gradual change is the most sustainable and most effective change. So if you now feel like you have several problems that need immediate attention, as much as I appreciate the urgency, I would encourage you to pick one and focus on one at a time, because it's hard enough to fix it's hard enough to fix one thing at a time is what I'm trying to say. It's really hard to fix multiple things at one time. So I'd pick the one you think is going to move the needle the most for you, put the rest on a temporary hold, and just work on that. Because if you can make significant progress towards even just one thing on this list, it actually will have a cumulative effect and everything else will be a little bit easier down the road. As always, I hope this helps, and I hope to see you next time. Take care.